Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Lynnette Khalfani-Cox. Hello, hello, hello. The Money Coach is here to talk to you, to all of you who are single and those of you who are couples for today's webinar. This is a financial webinar called Not Yet Married, and it is indeed a financial webinar for singles and couples. I'm so happy you took some time out of your busy schedule. I know all of us are super busy, and you decided to learn about money matters as it relates to you and your honey, or maybe even your potential honey. You could be not in a relationship, and you'll get a lot out of today's session, I promise you. So let's launch right in. You're going to see that I'm going to share some slides with you for this presentation. I'll be in and out of the presentation, and don't worry about it. You'll be able to follow along with me for the entire session. You should see the introduction to this presentation on your screen now. And I want to give a huge shout out, a word of thanks to our sponsor for the session today, the Delaware Financial Literacy Institute. You know them as the Money School. And I really appreciate the fact that they love to promote personal financial education. Financial literacy, in my mind, is what it's all about at so many levels if we want to do better with managing our money, whether we're single or in a relationship. So thanks again to DFLI, the Money School. Now, some of you are wondering, who am I? Well, in case you don't know, I'm the Money Coach, as I mentioned. I'm the author of a New York Times bestseller called Zero Debt, The Ultimate Guide to Financial Freedom. I've written 12 books, as a matter of fact. Zero Debt is the one I'm perhaps best known for. You can find me all over social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. So do take the time to connect and even watch out for the articles that I post on my free financial advice site. My blog is called askthemoneycoach.com. All right, so what are we going to be talking about today? Let me give you an overview of this particular financial workshop and share with you some of the objectives and what I hope you're going to get out of this. First, you're going to learn 10 key financial questions that you should ask first of yourself, then of your mate. And when I say your mate, I mean anybody that you might even be casually dating, even to someone who you're very seriously thinking about perhaps living with. Maybe you're already living with somebody you might be considering marrying, or for those of you who are joining us on the webinar and who have already tied the knot, there's some questions for you in there as well. I also want you to understand the ways in which credit, debt, and your spending impact your personal relationships. And I mean, in particular, your love interests, your relationship with your significant other. You're probably going to be surprised at some of the ways in which credit, debt, and spending do indeed impact a relationship. And then finally, the last two things, I want to tell you some strategies if you're single, some money tips that I think will be extremely valuable for you to follow and to utilize in your own life. And I want you to discover some written agreements that are especially important if you're going to live with someone. I'm not talking about a prenup. I'm not talking about what you might sign right before you get married, but two sets of other written agreements that can help you and build your personal friendships and your romantic relationships both at the same time, okay? So stay with me for this hour-long presentation. Again, this financial webinar is for singles and couples. We're calling it Not Yet Married, okay? Now, quick question. You can take this poll. Tell me, who of you out there are in fact in a relationship, or are you single? I want to know your relationship status. A is the choice if you're currently single and not dating anyone. You've just never been married yet. B is your poll choice. If you are, in fact, single, not dating, but you were previously married and got a divorce. C is for those of you who are just casually dating. You know, a lot of people call it different things. Friends with benefits. I don't know. You can say we're exclusive. Some of you might say, it's not a really official. We don't exactly put labels on it. It is what it is. That's fine as well. You can call it whatever you want. I put that in the C category for casually dating. Or if you're seriously dating someone, and I mean, you know, maybe you're already living together, maybe you're thinking about marriage, or at least one of you is thinking about marriage, or maybe you're already married if you've indeed tied the knot. It's important. I just want to get a sense for each one of you out there and know who I'm talking to. Get the sense, see that we have some of everybody on board, and that's good. That's what we want to have, because we really want to be able to speak to folks in all walks of life. And frankly, a lot of what you learned today, I hope that you'll share. I hope that you'll talk to somebody else about it. So let's start with those questions. I told you we were going to talk about 10 questions that you should ask and answer of yourself and of a mate or potential mate. Well, the first question to ask yourself is, what do I expect financially and otherwise out of a partner or a spouse, and why? You know, at the heart of a lot of money conflicts, a lot of personality conflicts, a lot of issues that go on in a relationship are a misalignment when it comes to expectations. And a lot of us have big expectations. I'm going to tell you the truth. I know I have really high standards. And fortunately, I have a mate who can live up to those standards. But I do think when it comes to money matters, you should ask yourself, do I expect my mate to take care of me financially? Do I expect my mate to pay half of the bills or all of the bills? Do I expect my mate to financially pay off some debts that I may currently have if we're thinking about getting married? Again, all of these expectations can play out in different ways when it comes to your relationship. So of course, you'd want to have a conversation about those expectations with your partner, especially if your mind and your belief is that the partner should do something for you financially, okay? Another question you should ask of yourself is to flip the script a little bit here and ask yourself, what do I have to offer economically and otherwise to a potential mate? Now, it's one thing to say, bring it, honey, bring on the bacon. I want you to do this and this and this for me. But is it really fair of you to put a huge financial, I won't say burden, but a huge financial set of expectations that you want a mate to meet, and then you're not willing to meet some of their needs or meet them part of the way? It doesn't necessarily have to be half the way, but if you have extremely lofty and high expectations economically from a mate, do you not think that the person is going to have similar set of expectations or some expectations? So think about what you can bring to the table economically, okay? And you'll see in here I said otherwise as well, because I certainly don't want to give the impression that all you have to offer is, what's in your bank account or your wallet. No, that's not it at all. A lot of us have really great attributes in terms of being trustworthy and honest, having good morals and values, being faithful, all of these things in terms of personality traits and other attributes, of course, are going to be attractive to a mate. But I just want you to think about economically your own condition and your own standards. What do you have to offer financially and otherwise to a potential mate? Now, finally, I want you to ask yourself, how can I become a more attractive person all around, financially and all around? Now, you see this image of these jars that are filled with coins. And if I said to you, here, I want you to take the jar of your choice, right? I'm using a dating analogy in case you haven't got it yet. And, if I said, take the jar of your choice, do you want the first jar that's about, maybe a third, 25% or a third full with coins? Do you want the one that's in the middle, which is about, 60 or 70% or so full? Or do you want the jar on the right, all other things being equal, that is pretty much completely full? I can tell you, I would take the jar on the right. I'm going to be honest with you. I would take the jar that's filled. Now, let's take money out of the equation. If somebody else is looking for a potential mate and seeking someone who is quote unquote attractive, right? What does that mean? At so many levels, there's physical attraction, of course. Can you make yourself more physically attractive? Wouldn't hurt. Everybody, try your best and look as good as you can, be healthy, etc. What about other things? Isn't it more attractive to be a fun and positive person as opposed to sort of a negative Nelly all the time, and a person who's critical and always saying things that are critical to others? Probably. I think most people would tend to be a little more attracted to the positive person who's upbeat, who makes them feel good and happy, as opposed to the person who's negative and critical all the time. What about some other ways in which you can be attractive? Certainly, if you're an honest person, if you're a trustworthy person, if you're a loyal person, if you're a person who stands for something, if you have commitments that you keep, if you honor your word, all of these things would make you a more attractive person to somebody else. Again, bring your things, whatever you can bring to the table financially, of course, that all helps as well. But of course, we know that there are other levels of attraction as well. For me, I tell you, I fell in love with my husband. I feel like I fell in love with him over the phone because he's such a great communicator. And I like people who are intellectually stimulating. And my husband happens to do it for me in that regard. And, some other regards too. We won't go there, but I'm just saying, we said we're going to talk honestly today, right? So ask yourself, how can I become a more attractive person financially and all around? All right. So another question, quick poll for you. If you were to really be honest with yourself and to think about the ways in which you can become a better you financially, what would you need to do? Is it A, you need to increase your credit scores or reduce your debts? Is it B, you need to boost your savings or your level of investments? Is it C, you need to increase your educational status? I know sometimes folks feel like, oh, I really should go back to school. I should have finished my degree, or maybe I should have gotten an advanced degree, that kind of thing. If you feel like that would make you a better you financially, maybe C is something to give consideration to. Or D, do you feel like you need to elevate your career standing or your job? Again, some people feel like my job is not a high enough paying job. Maybe my career is not exactly the line of work that I'd like to do, or that I've been trained to do, or that I would want to do. If that's the case, again, maybe give some consideration in your career life to the ways in which you can become a better you financially by elevating that career status. Some of you may have E as your choice. 2 or more of the above options are applicable for you, or maybe even F, all of the above would be relevant for you. Whatever the case, again, I'm trying to get you to think about and then ultimately consider how you can take action on becoming a better you financially. Now, let's turn our attention to some questions that anyone who is single and dating should ask a boyfriend or girlfriend. And in this regard, this is applicable even if it's just casual, even if it's 1 or 2 dates, 3 dates, 4 dates, and not an extremely serious long-term relationship. You're not talking about putting a ring on it. You're not picking out the wedding dress. You're just even casually dating. These questions, the next couple questions, are for those who are either casually or seriously dating. First up is, what short and long-term goals would you like to accomplish? You need to get in somebody's head if you're dating them, even casually, for a couple of reasons. One is that goals cost money. You know this, right? So if someone says, oh, really, my dream, next year, I want to start a business, or I want to go back to school, or I want to buy a house 5 years down the road, or I see myself being married in 3 to 5 years. They're giving you valuable information to tell you about A, the price tag for some of those items and what it's going to cost. You can also glean from this whether or not you can get on board with a goal, whether it's a goal that you happen to share or you can support in some way, right? And you can also see, frankly, if their goals are totally out of alignment or just so far fetched from you or what you would like to do, what you can consider supporting, what you think is a good goal, etc. Isn't it kind of nice to get a little bit of that sense as early as possible? If somebody says, my dream is to, go off into the military and to go overseas, it's a laudable, worthwhile goal. But if you're a person for whom having a partner in the military would just frighten you to death, or you'd be very, very uncomfortable with that, or you don't like the idea of a long distance relationship, then again, isn't it better to know early on? I think so. Here's another question you should ask someone that you're dating. Again, even if it's casual or someone that you are very serious with, pose this query to them. What are your thoughts on? And then you tell them a deal breaker. You insert whatever topic that's a deal breaker for you. It might be something financial or money related. It might be something personal, something ethical. It might be something moral. It might be something spiritual. It could be something educational. It could be a family issue. It could be anything. Just whatever is for you a very serious deal breaker, which is like all bets off. Can't do this. Can't go into this relationship. Can't go any further. And ask them, what is your relationship deal breaker? The reason I think this is so very important is, again, better to know upfront and also to have honest conversation. For example, if you say cheating is a deal breaker for me, in other words, sexual infidelity is a total deal breaker. I can't trust or deal with anybody who's unfaithful. And then your partner who you're dating, or even just casually says, oh yes, I hear you on that. I had someone who cheated on me once. It was awful. I would never cheat. And that's a deal breaker for me as well. Then, you know, you've kind of, at least you're kindred spirits on that one particular subject. You've had a little bit of a meeting of the minds, and then you obviously see how it plays out in action. Some people often say actions speak louder than words, but knowing that deal breaker issue is a substantive matter in a relationship that gets you beyond sort of surface conversations. Okay. A final question you should ask for someone that you're dating, casually or otherwise, is about their upbringing. And in particular, when you grew up, how were finances handled in your home? This can be extremely telling in so many ways, and it can also help you to understand better the person you're dating. Because a lot of people grew up in home environments that were very different than what we experienced. For example, your date, your casual date that you might be on, or your very serious partner who you're dating may say something to you like, my household was very traditional. My father worked all the time and brought home all the money, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom and raised us kids and blah, 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 blah. Or they may tell you something totally the opposite of that. Whatever the situation, you can be sure that to some extent, the individual was influenced by their own upbringing and what they saw and how they saw finances being handled. Everybody has what I call a money personality. Some of us are naturally more inclined to be savers. Others are spenders. Some are splurgers. Some are hoarders. Some are planners. So it's important to know your girlfriend or boyfriend's money personality. And part of it, how you can get to the root of their money personality, is by understanding how they were brought up in their household and how the finances were handled. All right. So now, question for you, another poll. If you think about your own upbringing, let me ask you, what was it like with the adults in your household? So I want to pose this query. With the adults in your household, the adult or adults in the household in which you grew up, what do you remember most? Is it that A, your mother or another woman handled most of the finances? B, your father or another man handled most of the finances? Or was it C, a collaborative effort in which your parents or other caregivers basically jointly managed the finances and collaborated as a team on money matters? Was it D, very little discussion or maybe even no conversation whatsoever about money? Or was it E, drama all the time, constantly money battles and arguments and money problems? That's the household in which I grew up, if you really want to know. To be honest with you, I remember my parents constantly arguing about money when I was a very young girl. My parents divorced when I was 7 years old, and financial issues did loom large in their relationship. Again, I'm asking you this question so you can take a moment to reflect and think about how your own money personality, your behaviors, your beliefs, your values, etc., is very much linked to how you grew up. Okay. Now you have to think about the partner that you're with and how they also are going to be influenced by how they grew up. Sometimes I think we have a tendency to just judge people, to lash out, or to say, why are you doing this? This is irresponsible, or this is reckless, or this is inconsiderate. And maybe the person isn't trying to be irresponsible, reckless, or inconsiderate. Maybe it's literally all that they know because that's what they saw and that's what they grew up with. Think about that for a moment, okay? Now, here's some stuff you should ask a significant other, somebody that you're very serious about, okay? We've gone beyond the sort of dating phase and just those folks who are sort of casually dating or kind of seeing each other. This is when it gets serious, okay? You should ask them, what's your credit score? And you'll see this chart here reflects a range of scores from really bad, very poor credit, to poor, to fair, up to good, and to very excellent credit, okay? Now, let me pause for a moment here. I'm going to come out of this screen. I just want to talk to you 1 second on credit scores, okay? Okay, yep, I'm still here with you live and everything. So some of you are like, well, what's excellent? Just a quick tutorial on credit scores. Your credit score ranges from 300 to 850 points, right? The higher your credit score, the better lending risk that you're deemed to be, at least in the eyes of banks and credit unions and lenders and anybody else who might give you a loan, any kind of loan, student loan, a car loan, a mortgage, a credit card, etc., business loan. If you're in the 760 to 850 point credit score range, you have what's considered excellent credit. Kudos to you. You guys know one of my books is called Perfect Credit, right? It's telling you about how to have that credit score range of 760 to 850. If your credit score is 700 or better, you have good credit. That's still something to be proud of. That's very good credit. If you're in the sort of 699 down to 620 range, that's kind of average or fair kind of credit. Really, anything below 620, 619 and below is considered poor credit or bad credit. I mean, you can get, and again, in that chart that talked about very poor, like really bad credit. I've seen credit scores in the 400s. I mean, I've seen in the 500s. And yes, that's a low credit score. But what does it all mean when it comes to a relationship? Is this a time for you to judge your partner, to say, oh my gosh, how could you have, racked up these debts, not paid these bills, had late payments or charge-offs or judgments or repossessions or bankruptcies or whatever they might have done in the past? No, it's not a time for you to do that. I'll remind you, again, without getting overly preachy here, and there's a reason in the Bible it says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Have you been perfect in every area of your life? In every regard of finances? You might be really good. And if you have been, I salute you and, commend you for that. However, if you can erase judgment out of the equation when you start talking about some of these very serious matters when it comes to money issues with your significant other, trust me that you'll go a long way in building a solid foundation, one of great communication, one of trust, one of shared goals and pushing forward to reach goals together, and openness and honesty. Because who wants to talk about issues that they've struggled with or had problems overcoming, etc., if they feel like the person they're talking to is just going to wag their finger, judge them, condemn them, or start berating them? So I want you to remember that when you start talking about some of these questions as it pertains to the questions that I'm telling you to ask your significant other, okay? All right, so let's go back. You see, I went back to the screens here. So yes, you should ask your significant other about their credit score. What else? You should ask them about their debts and how much they owe, okay? Again, this is not a question that you should be afraid or ashamed to ask. If you're thinking about marriage, if you're engaged, if you're living together, if you're already married, you really should know how much debt your spouse owes. Some things may affect you, especially if there's been again, a whole host of things. If you're in a community property state, if you have assets that you're going to build together, loans that you're going to co-sign together, or that you already have, that kind of thing, it's not inappropriate or sort of unsavory for you to ask about their debts, student loan debts, credit card debt, the auto loan, whatever it might be. Honest partners should be able to talk to one another about their finances, okay? Here's a biggie. This is a doozy, I know, guys, to ask your significant other how much they earn. Now, again, remember that I'm talking about somebody that you're seriously dating. Please don't do this on the first date, second date, third date. No, that's not this kind of, you don't want to put something this heavy and serious out like that, because frankly, at that point, it's really not your business. Again, I'm saying for those of you who are in a serious relationship and you're dating and you have a significant other that you're either living with, you're thinking about living with, thinking about marriage, that kind of thing. Again, if you can have a very serious interpersonal, perhaps sexual relationship with a person already, then yes, you should be able to ask them, how much do you earn? This is a surprising thing to me, though. 43% of Americans who were polled did not know what their spouse, their significant other, that's a real significant other, earns. Isn't that kind of shocking to you? I was so surprised when I read that. It's, a thing, apparently. It's a true thing. And guess what? About 10% of people were off by about $25,000 or more. That's how much they misjudged what their spouse earns. I really think that that's a travesty and a shame. I mean, really, you should know what your spouse earns. I get it that some people might be freelance. Some people might have, small businesses, and the income can fluctuate from one year to another. We get those type of things, but that's not what we're talking about here. Okay. And for those of you who are reluctant to ask this question because you think it's too intrusive, or you think it might make you sound like a gold digger, no, absolutely not. You shouldn't have those worries, because first of all, when you have this conversation with your significant other, you're also going to be disclosing information. You don't think this is going to be a one-way street, do you? No. That's the whole point of a conversation. It's a two-way street. So I'm sure that in the course of talking about how much your significant other earns, either that person will ask you the same question, how much you earn, or you will volunteer that information about how much you earn, because that's what openness and transparency is about in a relationship. It's not a one-sided thing. It's about, again, how can we collectively, if we choose to, potentially join forces, not necessarily joining all the accounts, because those of you who have been in on some of my other financial webinars know that I see the value for some people of having separate accounts. Personally and professionally, what I recommend is that couples who have decided to live together and or get married have both joint accounts out of which they pay the household bills, and then separate accounts from which they can maintain financial independence and autonomy. However, not everybody sees it that way. I'm just one opinion. My standards and beliefs and values and opinions don't have to override everything else that is working or that's healthy and good for you in your relationship if you do it in another fashion and it actually works for you. But the problem becomes for most people is that they're in the dark. A lot of people are clueless. They really don't know. They couldn't tell you how much debt their partner or their spouse or their significant other makes. They couldn't tell you how much the person earns. So then how are you going to start building a life together if that's the plan? How are you going to meet and strive for any shared goals, like if you want to have kids together or if you want to buy a home together and so forth? Okay. So yes, you should know what your partner earns. Let's move on. Another question for your significant other is about accounts. Now you see, I just did a nice little segue into this, into asking you about, how you might run it. You should ask them, would they prefer separate accounts or joint accounts? Again, there's no right or wrong answer per se. It's about an alignment of ideas and values and vision and making sure you're on the same page. Remember that first question that I asked you in the very beginning to ask yourself about what expectations, what financial expectations would you have of a partner or a spouse? Well, this is one of them. If you're thinking, well, of course we're going to have joint accounts. And the other person is like, but of course we're going to keep things separate. Then you need to talk that out and come to a meeting of the minds, right? Alrighty, let's move on. Now, here's a quick quiz for you. For those of you who are in a relationship, or if you're single, just tell me about your last partner that you were dating. When it comes to money, in particular, their income, did you know how much they earned? Be honest now. Do you know what your partner, your current partner earns, or your most recent partner, what he or she earned? Tell me if that's a yes, or if that's a no, or if you're kind of guesstimating. You know what that guesstimate means, right? It's kind of a cross between a guess and an estimate. You're like, I'm not exactly sure. A lot of people don't know. As I said, 43% of people who were polled who were actually married did not know. I think that's kind of fascinating. All right, let's talk now about the ways in which your credit and debt and spending impacts your relationship. It has a huge impact on a lot of factors, many of which you might not have considered. So as I walk you through some of these areas, the impact on your marriage prospects, the impact on your happiness in your relationship, the viability and stability as a long-term couple together, and your ability to reach shared goals, I want you to think about how you can beat the odds. I want you to think about some of the statistics that I'm going to tell you and how you're going to ensure that in your relationship, either your present relationship or your relationship in the future, that you are going to avoid some of the pitfalls that many, if not most, couples encounter when it comes to credit, debt, and spending patterns, okay? So what in particular am I talking about here? Well, first and foremost, we already know, and I probably don't have to tell you this, but when you have a lot of money arguments and a lot of financial disagreements, that's a negative sign in terms of the financial health and the quality of the relationship as a whole, and it's a predictor of divorce. Now, some people say, oh my gosh, we argue all the time about money. We can't even have a decent conversation. Well, you know, there was a bit of research done on this topic by a Utah State University professor named Jeffrey Dew. And in a nutshell, he found that couples who argue about money several times a week were 30% more likely to break up versus those who only argue about money once a month. In other words, the statistical likelihood of you breaking up is in fact greater if you're constantly arguing about money. And it may not be the money problems themselves, it's the stress, it's the negativity, it's the weight of all of that it puts on the relationship that tends to fracture things, okay? Now, I have a question for you with regard to your credit score. I talked to you for a few moments about credit scores, and I told you that whether or not it's your FICO credit score or your Vantage credit score, that your credit score is going to range between 300 and 850 points. Remember that? So my question is, can your credit score predict the outcome of your relationship? In other words, the success or happiness of it, whether or not you'll break up or stay together? What do you think? I don't know. Pause for a moment. Think about it. Some of you are thinking, no way, you can't tell me statistically that, you know, if I have a credit score of X, 600, 700, 800, 450, that's going to tell me something. Well, actually, it does. A lot of research has gone into this, and I'm going to show some of it to you right now. The Federal Reserve Board, some researchers at the Federal Reserve Board have a working paper that they recently put out around this topic of credit scores and relationships. I find it fascinating. Yes, I like to geek out about money issues, but I think that even the average person would be interested in this. Essentially, what they found is that people in general tend to flock together. This was a surprise to me. You know, I know so many couples who are what I call financial opposites. One is a spender, one is a saver, etc. But when it comes to actual credit scores, they found that generally speaking, people tend to connect with others who have similar credit scores as them. I thought that was kind of interesting. Of course, that's not always the case. And they were saying that generally speaking, this is the pattern, right? But now let's take it a little bit deeper. The Federal Reserve researchers also found that people who have higher credit scores were more likely statistically to be in committed relationships and to actually stay together. Okay? That bodes well for those of you who have good credit scores. What about the flip side of it? Well, as you might suspect, and maybe as you might not suspect here, couples who had a mismatch, in other words, there was a 60-point or greater difference in their credit scores. Maybe one person had a 680 credit score and one person had a 600 credit score. Maybe one person had a 730 and the other person had a 650. Who knows? Those couples were more likely to break apart. I wonder if it's because they had a misalignment of their values. That's what the Fed researchers thought. They said essentially it wasn't always so much about the financial ramifications that can go along with negative credit scores or high credit scores. It was that over time, the values that these two parties had when they had wildly differing credit scores, those differing values sort of made them act out in different ways, have different behaviors, etc., that drove them apart. Interesting stuff. What about debt? I told you we were going to talk about credit, debt, and spending. You know that statistically, you'll have a better shot at staying together if you both have higher credit scores and if your credit scores are closer in alignment with one another. But what about debts? If you have a lot of debt, does that mean your relationship is doomed? No, not necessarily. However, there are some pitfalls, again, to be aware of. 57% of people who are in a relationship said that they would be reluctant to be, 57% of folks who were polled, and this was through an NFCC study, said that they would have reservations about being in a relationship with somebody who had big debts. Now, some of you say, oh my gosh, I have a big mortgage, I have a lot of student loan debt, I have credit card debts. You know, the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, again, they took this nationwide survey and they found that 57% of people said that, ooh, that would be a really big issue for me, okay? They really wouldn't want to do it. Now, what would they do? 37% of those polled by NFCC said that they would actually wait to get married until the debt was paid. Now, some of you might say, how come they don't want to be on my team? How come they don't want to support me? How come they don't want to, show me their love or prove their love, that kind of thing? Well, first of all, again, I'm going back to your expectations. Are you suggesting that because they love you, they should automatically pay off your debts? I don't think that's the case. I think a person can be truly and deeply in love with you and want you to have a more fiscally sound, fiscally responsible status before you enter into a marriage. And I don't think that that's a reflection that they don't love you. Okay. Now, some people said that they would be open to it. As a matter of fact, 46% of people surveyed by NFCC said, you know what? I've met this person. If I've fallen in love with them, yes, I'd be open to go ahead and getting married and jointly paying off debt. So you're going to have individuals in each end of the spectrum. One is not right or wrong. One is not better or worse. One is not more in love or more supportive than the other one. It's a matter of personal preference. A lot of it is likely rooted in their own financial upbringing and the things that they've experienced. Okay. All right, let's move on. Another survey that was done by a group called Life Innovations looked at 50,000 couples, not just couples who were dating. These people were on board and ready to get married, okay? They, in fact, went through a marriage preparation course. Let's see what they found. Among happy couples, only 24% of them said that major debts were a problem. Among unhappy couples, however, 65% of them, almost 2/3, said that major debts were a problem. So again, I asked you at the outset to think about the statistics I was going to show you, how you can beat the odds and whether or not you conform to some of these statistics, right? If you want to beat the odds, it's probably in your favor to have a high credit score, to work on paying off your debts, etc. Not to say that you want to be a statistic one way or another, but if you had to be a statistic, don't you want to be in the positive crowd, in the previous category that I just showed you among happy couples, where just fewer than 1 out of 4 of those couples said major debts were a problem, right? You don't want to necessarily have to be in the unhappy crowd where debts are indeed a problem. 72% of the 100,000 individuals, remember 50,000 couples, who were polled by Life Innovation said they wish their partner was more careful about spending. And it's the spending category that is most predictive and that is most relevant when it comes to figuring out whether or not couples are going to be happy together. By far and away, all of the research that's been done, and there's tons and tons and tons of research, and I've cited just some of it for you in today's session, spending decisions tend to be make or break financial issues for couples, tend to define or to determine in large part whether or not a couple is fiscally happy together, which in turn helps to determine their personal happiness with one another. Look at this stat. 89% of happy couples said that they agree. That's 9 out of 10 couples. They don't necessarily see eye to eye on every single thing, or as this couple, nose to nose, but they do in general agree on how to spend money. That's a really strong indicator that spending values, priorities, and decisions being in alignment can help you to be happy as a couple. But only 4 out of 10 couples, 41% of those couples who were unhappy, said that they agreed on how to spend money. Again, the majority of them, almost 60%, were obviously, not in agreement on how to spend money. Again, which category would you like to be in? Me, I want to be in this category with the happy couples who agree on how to spend money, not among the unhappy group. So what does all this data tell us? What does all these statistics mean? You see this couple working hard together. He's doing the heavy lifting. She's helping, doing her fair share as well. I think part of what it's telling us is that money matters in a relationship. It's hard work. I mean, there's no getting around it. There's some heavy lifting to be done. But we do have a little bit of a roadmap. We do have some lessons that we can learn from all of those statistics and all of those other couples. Isn't it so much easier to learn a lesson based on somebody else's experience than to have to do a lot of trial and error, a lot of setbacks, etc. for yourself? I'd much rather learn, especially if it has to be an expensive lesson, emotionally expensive in terms of time wasted or time consumed, expensive in financial terms, expensive to your health, etc. Let me learn from somebody else's mistakes or the good things that they've done, and then let me emulate the positive and throw out the negative. That's why I think to be a successful couple, you should think about Henry Ford's statement. Henry Ford lived, a good long time until 1947, and he said something that was probably meant in the business context. Maybe it was in the personal context, because I certainly saw it as relevant for couples. And the gist of it is, he said, coming together is easy. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success. So don't be afraid of hard work in a relationship. In my younger years, I used to think that, if a relationship was hard work, that's probably not the one for you. It's not worth it. If it's not coming so naturally and so easy. No, now that I'm in my 40s, I get it that the amount of work that you put into a relationship is exactly commensurate with what you're going to get out of it. And if you put in the hard work, and sometimes it's going to be easy, sometimes it's going to be carefree and effortless, and that's great too. But a sustained relationship over time at any level requires work. Just like tending to a garden is not a one and done thing. Just like you have to plant those seeds, you have to prune those flowers, you have to cut back the weeds, you have to water, you have to make sure your plants and your flowers get sunlight. All that is work. But then you're rewarded with this beautiful bounty, this garden that's can be appreciated year after year after year. A relationship is just like that. Okay, let's move on. If I asked you about your own relationship and your money arguments, we talked about unhappy couples and happy couples. When it comes to money matters, how often do you and your partner argue? Is it A, frequently, B, sometimes, C, rarely, D, never? Think about what is true for you. All of us have different levels of shall we say, intense conversation, intense fellowship, as my pastor says, intense interactions with our spouses or our mates or our significant others, our dates, our boyfriends and girlfriends. Think about it. You really want to get it down to the low category, as in never or rarely. Okay? That's when you're getting into a healthier zone. And I recognize that it takes time to get there often, and that coming together as in a partnership means that in the beginning there may be a lot of friction when you first start talking about it, which is why again I recommend that you do it in a judgment-free way with all the compassion and love and care that you can muster for the other person. It really does help. All right. So I want to share with you now a personal story about me. Yep, that's me. The money coach on the screen there. That is on my wedding day. I got married on what I consider very, very, very lucky. In fact, so did my husband Earl, who, as you can see, was smiling and gleaming right there. And we both picked this day a year or so in advance from our engagement. And we both felt like it was the second time around for both of us. We had both previously been married. And we said, oh, we feel so lucky. We feel so blessed to have found each other. So we wanted to pick a lucky date. And we did. We picked 7/7/7, July 7th, 2007. So I'm so happy now. This is our 9th year going in, and we are still in love with one another, still very happy, and still grateful for one another, and pleased that we got married. But I have to tell you, there's been some issues along the way. You see what I'm showing you now, some baggage, right? Some big bags, if you look really closely. And as a matter of fact, this looks exactly like our luggage, okay? We have a set of sort of khaki green colored luggage that looks pretty much exactly like this. I didn't photograph this and take this exact picture, but it's very much like what the Money Coach has. But I'm sharing this with you for a reason, to show you that all of us have baggage and issues. I'm going to jump out of the slides here for a quick second because I want to talk to you one-on-one for a minute as I share with you my own personal story. So Earl and I got married, and we did so, as I said, in 7/7/7, right? Lucky date for us. But what was the baggage that I brought to the table? A whole bunch of it. If I'm honest, a whole lot of baggage. One of the things was, because I was previously married, I had been married for 13 years, I had kids already. So I had 2 children. Earl, bless his heart, walked into a ready-made family. Now that's some issues for any of you who are dating, and maybe you dating somebody who already has kids. My kids were fairly young at the time. They were, I think, 5 and 3 or something, somewhere along that lines. Well, at the same time, I had an ex-spouse, right? I had alimony. I had child support. Yes, I was the one who was paying. I don't mean I was receiving it. I was paying it, okay? It's rare, I know, that, most of the time the alimony child support thing goes the other way. I had joint custody of my kids, 50-50 custody. It always remained that way. And literally to my oldest is off in college now. My son is a sophomore in high school, and we still have joint custody to this day. It's never changed, 50-50, and it's worked for our family. We've each remarried. My ex-spouse remarried and has a wife and 2 other kids in his family. But what I'm suggesting to you is that the transition, when Earl and I started dating and got married, we had Alexis. We had Alexis before we got married. Shocker, huh? Okay, yeah, it's true. I'm just being honest with you. I said I was going to tell you a personal story. So imagine a single man who was a homeowner, who had never had kids, who was doing very well on his own, owned his business, had a 6-figure income, and he meets me, he falls in love. He says, wow, I'm getting a package deal here. And he has to take the whole enchilada, right? If he wants me, he's got the package deal. So yes, he graciously accepted. And I remember him telling me something in this transition when I was contemplating all of my decisions and et cetera. I told you we had Alexis, but I was very adamant that I did not want to get married again unless I was 100% certain that this was going to be a marriage for a lifetime. And Earl, in all of his love and compassion and all of his adoration for me, he told me something that I never forgot. He said, "If you fall, I will catch you." And I was like, oh, my heart, this is the one. But he was so gracious and loving and accepting of all of my issues. And yes, believe it or not, he had his issues too. Okay. I'm going to jump back into the slides here just because I want to move on and I want to make sure that we get through the final 10 minutes here. But I just want you to understand that this is real world. When you have financial relationships, you don't just have the money issues in a vacuum. You have the baggage that goes along with it. You have, as Earl and I both had, each one of us had our issues. He has some mommy issues and some daddy issues. He has some personal issues. I had some mommy issues and daddy issues and personal issues. But this was a man who said, if you fall, I'll catch you. It was comforting for me to hear that, especially knowing that we were going to build a family together. And indeed, we did. This is the 5 of us. Again, this was taken several years ago, but this is when Alexis, our little one, as you can see, she's in the middle of us, and my 2 older children, Aziza and Jakada, who are his kids now. They call him daddy. They love him. And it all worked out just great. But I want to share something with you that even amid my transition from divorce, dating again, dating Earl immediately, and having a baby, getting married, I did bring some things to the table. Needless to say, I was a business owner myself. I did have a 6-figure income myself. I was very happy and appreciative that I had a partner who loved me enough to say, if you fall, I'll catch you. But I didn't need saving. And that's one of the lessons that I want to share with you next. I don't want you to think that you should be out there looking for Prince Charming. You don't need a relationship rescue. That's not the way to go about it if you're single and not yet married. Even if you're a couple and you're already in a relationship, stop looking for Prince Charming, okay? Also, if you're a man or woman, don't feel the need to be the hero all the time. Don't feel the need to be the heroine. That's a big weight on your shoulders. You feel like you're kind of holding up the world if you have to constantly be Superman or Superwoman or Hercules. And it's risky. It's emotionally risky. It's financially risky. It can take a toll on your relationship. Stop trying to play the hero all the time and rescue someone. You should, if you are single, keep your high standards. I mentioned before when I said I have high standards, and thankfully I found a mate, a husband who can meet those high standards. I want you to hold on to their high standards. But you'll see this sign here that says good, better, and best, right? Some of you have unrealistic standards, and that's what I want you to really be cognizant of. Don't ask for perfection in 25 areas and you can only give perfection in 1, okay? Don't ask for perfection in anything in terms of dealing with another human being. You know what? We're called to be real, to be us. You don't have to be perfect, and someone else shouldn't have to be perfect. They're not a robot. Yes, you want them to live up to your standards of fidelity, of honesty, of loyalty and integrity. You would love to see them be financially stable. But are you setting the bar so high and so unrealistically high that nobody could ever surpass those hurdles? If you are, I want you to think about that, okay? Keep the high standards, but ditch the unrealistic expectations, okay? Now, those of you who are single should also connect with a money mentor. You see this quote here from Thomas Jefferson, and it says, never spend your money before you've earned it. Well, that's definitely good advice. A money mentor can be anybody, a money coach like myself, a financial advisor, a CPA, a person who's a wealth advisor. It could be a good friend who already has their stuff together and who is doing really well and has the type of financial standing or status that you aspire to reach. Connect with somebody who can help you along the way, can give you information, feedback, advice, and tips that can be crucial, extremely instrumental in doing better yourself financially. I want you to also learn how to cook, singles. Now that came out of the blue, didn't it? Some of you are like, huh, what? Yes, I want you to learn how to cook because it will be life-changing for you, okay? I just want to share 3 quick ways in which learning how to cook, yes, learning how to throw down in the kitchen, singles, will be helpful to you. First of all, you're going to stop eating out so much. So many singles eat out way, 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 way too often. You know who you are, and I don't even have to tell you. Because if you look at it, you'll see, yep, I don't cook at home as much as I should. I don't take my lunches. I don't do all of this. And you're spending a lot of money. You can save money, cut back on that one area of discretionary spending by learning how to cook more. You can also learn to get closer with your spouse or your mate. Cooking together is a bonding experience. It's something that you can do happily and joyfully together. It's a shared experience. And then, oh yes, it can lead to some other stuff, you guys. What you say? Woo, look at that last picture at the bottom. Do you see how he's giving her that look? It's like, va va voom. You know what I mean. Some of you are like, the money coach, what are you talking about, Lynnette? Yes. Spicing it up in the kitchen may lead you to spice it up elsewhere, okay? I'll just leave it at that. Moving on. Another tip for you singles. I want you to create financial friends days. What is a financial friend day? It's a day when you get together with your girls or your guys, if you're a guy, and you guys work on something financial together. You have fun together. Maybe you guys plot and dream and think about how you might start a business together or be supportive of one another. Maybe you guys think about creative ways to save money. Maybe you guys go out and do something fun together and it doesn't cost any money whatsoever, okay? So in other words, a financial friends days is I'm going to spend some time with my girls or my guys, and we're going to enjoy one another's company. We're going to support one another in our goals, our spending goals, our saving goals, our debt reduction goals, our wealth building goals, our business goals, our career goals. You get my picture, right? Those are the friends you want to have on your team. And trust me, one of them might end up being a money mentor as well. Okay, let's move on. Now, let's talk about written agreements. I'm going to ask you to stay with me for about 6 or 7 more minutes as I walk you through this, and we'll wrap up the session. I want you to think about if you're living with someone and you have a rental agreement with the landlord, right? That's fine, and you should. Well, you should also have a written agreement with any roommate that you choose to live with. So the rental agreement is applicable for anybody who has any type of housing situation. That's a rented agreement, apartment, a building, a condo or co-op rather, a townhouse, a single family or a multifamily home, whatever it may be, okay? What should your rental agreement cover? First, it should talk about the rent itself. Who pays? When is the rent due? What percentage? Is it 50-50? That kind of thing. You should also talk about deposits. When do you get the deposit back? Under what circumstances? How will the deposit be split? Those kinds of things. What about extras? You, of course, will have utilities and expenses. You're going to have utilities like gas bill or electric or water bills. How will you apportion or allocate those expenses? Are you paying it based on 50-50? Are you paying it based on income or some other measure? You need to specify that and do so in writing. If you do, you can alleviate so many misunderstandings. You can keep the friendship that you forged before, as you walk in the door. You're not going to agree to go live with somebody when you're mad and angry and, feeling, bad about the relationship. Usually it's when you're on the high note. Oh yes, we'll live together. We're moving together. You're happy, or maybe you're friends and friendship turns to something more, whatever the case might be. But having this written agreement, this rental agreement, will help you to preserve the friendship no matter what happens to the relationship. What about renter's insurance? If you're renting, I recommend strongly that everyone have renter's insurance. It's so super cheap, and it'll cover the items in the apartment, condo, house, etc. So you should get that rental insurance. What about the appliances? If one of you buys the appliances and you move out later or you break up or whatever, do you take those appliances with you? If you have a rental agreement, like a rent to own situation, who pays that every single month? Again, specify that in your rental agreement. What about visitors? Sometimes people are like, you have just way too many people coming over here. Or sometimes people are saying, I don't want visitors after a certain amount of time or to stay more than one night or 2 nights or whatever the case might be. Again, talk about it, have a discussion, agree on it up front so that you don't have misunderstandings or conflict around that later on. And perhaps the most important part of your rental agreement is a plan B. It's a provision in your rental agreement that you do with your roommate. Again, whoever you're dating or seeing, thinking about marrying, etc. It's about what happens if things don't go according to plan. Because going according to plan is plan A, right? But what if the landlord chooses not to, for whatever reason, fix something, and now you guys have to deal with a big repair bill or maintenance costs? What about if one of you, like this guy, gets disabled for a minute? He looks like he's broken his ankle or something. She's like, oh, honey, she's all over him, doting on him. But yeah, who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to pay his part of the rent? If there's job loss or disability or illness, you need to address those issues as well in your rental agreement. A smart person is going to do that. Let's move on to another kind of written contract. These are called non-marital agreements, also known as living together contracts. Okay. You might not have ever heard of these. True legal documents that can be established. Practically every state in the country recognizes non-marital agreements or so-called living together contracts. Here's what you want to include in those. You certainly want to outline or specify what property you had that you brought into the household before you even got into the relationship, okay? If that was your sofa or your tables or your flat screen TV, that kind of thing, you should specify that and how it should be treated in the event something goes wrong, or in the event you just break up or decide to move separate and go your separate ways, etc. Even the property that you acquire after you move in during the relationship, you should specify what happens to that. Again, we're thinking about being wise for the future, to forecast and to say, if something should change, how do we want to deal with that scenario? And it's better to deal with the scenario up front while you're in the happy zone, while you're still friends, while you're all lovey-dovey, and while you have care and consideration for one another, as opposed to doing it later when you're mad and angry or if something goes south, okay? In your living together contract, you should also talk about gifts that each of you has received. Maybe your family gave you some money or you inherited property. And by all means, don't forget about the household bills, those joint expenses that you might have to pay. Again, we talked about the expenses before, even in the rental agreement, whether it's gas or electric, utilities, water, that kind of thing. Specify how those should be paid in your living together agreement. And please don't forget about the kids you might have. And by these kids, I mean the little furry ones, the pets. You'd be shocked at how many people just have knockdown, drag out, fights and arguments over the pets after they break up, because they're like family. And indeed they are family. So you should also specify, if you have pets or if you get pets in the future, what happens to the pets in the event that you guys go your separate ways. Okay. Finally, for either type of contract, whether it's a living together contract or another type of contract for a rental agreement, you might want to have a dispute provision in there. First, let's focus on the living together contract. The dispute provision, it sounds kind of formal, right? You might be like, arbitration, mediation. Well, you don't have to necessarily go to, the American Association of Arbitrators or something like that. You might just agree that if there's really something that we just don't agree upon, we're going to agree that we'll have a third party to come in, a third party of your choosing, or, you can name the person or not, but just a independent third party to come in and add some perspective and offer some guidance. That's a dispute provision that you might include in your living together contract. A breakup provision is specifically about assets. Again, in the event of separation or death, what will be done with those assets? Now, regardless of whether or not you use the rental agreement or the living together contract, again, I shared with you at the outset that this is all about trying to establish a positive relationship for the two of you, regardless of whether you're single, regardless of whether or not you're already in a relationship and you're in a couple. Hopefully you started off as friends. Maybe you started off as romantic partners. Doesn't matter, but you want to certainly end as friends. You want to, even if you have to say goodbye for whatever reason, hopefully end it on a conciliatory note. It doesn't have to always be friendly and oh so positive and lovey-dovey. It might not be that way, and that's fine. But let's hope that it's not with anger, animosity, hatred, resentment. And so one clause, a final clause that I'd suggest that you include in your rental agreement or your living together contract is something that I call a good faith provision. And in a nutshell, that just is a statement where you both agree that you're going to try to treat each other with all the humanity you can muster, with civility, with courtesy and respect, with honesty and candor. Again, even if the relationship itself comes to an end and goes its course. If you started off as friends, hopefully you can end as friends. Even if you started off as romantic partners, hopefully you can end as friends. If you no longer choose to live together and you end up not getting married as well, and you have a rental agreement or a living together contract, please do include that good faith provision to say, no matter what happens, I hope we can always be civil to one another, always treat each other with respect. Okay? Now, I'm going to end it there, and thank you really so much for taking the time to stick with me for this hour-long presentation. I know that money matters can be tough to talk about when you have a significant other or a partner, and I'm really super grateful that you took an hour or so out of your schedule to join me in this financial webinar, Not Yet Married, a financial webinar for singles and couples. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed being able to impart some of this wisdom to you, and I do hope you'll join me for upcoming seminars as well. Again, this is Lynnette Khalfani-Cox. I'm the co-founder of the free financial advice site, AskTheMoneyCoach.com. Thank you so much for joining me.